And even an MSP owner who commits to, I'm only going to do 10 grand net new MRR, which someone would be happy with next year, they don't even know the weight of carrying the quota, because in their mind, they know that what's going to happen if I don't? Who's going to fire me? I think of it as like the chicken exit on a roller coaster. You didn't even have to get on the ride because you just waited in line all day to just step right through the cart and out the chicken exit. That's what it's like to not hold yourself accountable to that number.
Hey guys, Damian Stevens, host of MSP Mindset. I'm so excited to be at GrowCon 2024 and be in person with Jeffrey Newton. Jeffrey, thank you for making time to take the energy and the time to speak with me when your busy schedule at GrowCon.
Yeah, happy to do it. We had such a good first conversation.
Oh my gosh, so many people were asking and commenting and sharing about what you shared there.
Yeah.
So I don't want to waste any time. I want to kind of get right into it.
All right.
You've come to GrowCon how many times?
This is my third time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then as a customer, which side of the aisle?
Yeah, so the first 2 years were as a customer in MSP, and then this year as a speaker on the main stage tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm going to get right into this. You've been an MSP that grew dramatically, or multiple MSPs, depending on how you want to kind of paint that.
Yeah.
And you're, author of books and co-founder Cyft and all these other things. What do you think the biggest challenge most MSPs are facing right now are, or what do you hear the most?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I deduce from what I hear is that each MSP really does have a deep desire to pursue what their vision, what their dream really is, right? Like there's no lack of want to. And then the second piece of that I discover is that most of them are fairly disillusioned as a result of touching that hot stove once or twice or 3 times before, meaning they want to grow, they want to really build the business as a business rather than just a lifestyle. And so they do experience or explore or dabble with, I'm going to try this marketing thing, or I'm going to do this. And as a result, the experience that they come out with doesn't necessarily leave them with the best taste in their mouth, right? And so the funny thing, funny is not the right word, it's more of like the finicky or the fickle thing about the industry is that there sort of are so many charlatans on the edges that you can't really blame them, right? It's not their fault, but they really want to grow, they want to make a difference, they love what they do, even as stressful as it is at times, right? But the overarching goal is that they love it, and they want it, but they don't know how to go about it. And and to the extent where some of them stop trying or think that it just isn't possible, right?
Sure.
And as a result, then they just sort of accept where they are, because that pain is at least a comfortable pain or a known pain rather than the fear of the unknown on the other side.
Hey guys, today's episode is sponsored by Servosity. I created Servosity because I was an MSP who lost data and had to face my client. I don't want you to ever be in that situation. So what's different about Servosity is that we test your backups maniacally. We test those daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly. We manage the backups for you, so 80% of your workload is gone and you can focus on your core mission. And all of the storage is both immutable and unlimited. If you'd like to learn more, take a look at servosity.com. Yeah. I love how you talked about the charlatans on the edge, because I know there's a lot of MSPs I've talked to that are like, whenever I take these accounts over, I can't believe how little these people were doing, how much they were charging them, giving them so little value.
Yeah.
And because my experience with MSPs, for the most part, are people that have put their blood, sweat, and tears into it. Yeah. They've been over backwards. In fact, most of them aren't even charging enough, right? They're just providing so much value. Yeah. And, they're just happy to be able to pay their team, have a great team, provide value for the client. Right. And so, do you see any commonality in where they're getting stuck, or where those maybe plateaus or complexity ceilings occur?
Yeah, I think the boundary line is that traditionally what I've seen is that MSPs are cut from this cloth of they have always been tinkerers. They're born natural problem solvers. They seek to find. They'll always work themselves through the situation. And there's an inherent flaw, I think, in that context of where you come from too. And I usually describe it as this, is that just because you have the capability to figure it out or overcome it or whatever, doesn't mean, one, you have the capacity, or that it's where you should be playing, right? And I think that there are times where MSP owners, where, let's just go with the growth side, since this is a growth conference, the sales side, it's the one area that they are least experienced. It's also the most uncomfortable because it takes them out of their natural state, which is problem solving and not like a savior from the hero standpoint, but like the people side of the business isn't really where they're most comfortable. It's the keyboard and the tech. I like to generalize the industry after being in it for so long as like most MSPs started with a really high technical aptitude individual who didn't want to work for someone else anymore, went out on their own, had just enough people skills to land their first clients, get the referrals. They were all in. They did such a great job doing what they do that they turned around one day and sort of had a business with like 2 coworkers or 2 employees, right? But they don't know how to manage. They don't want to manage. They don't like accountability. They don't want to do all those things. And so a lot of the industry gets limited at maybe 5 people, sub 1 million in revenue, because you just sit there and spin all those plates all the time, right? And as a result of growing, the natural progression then is now you have all these other things trying to steal your time, or that actually do steal your time, right? And so then the things that made you great start to slip, and now you're just in this internal strife where it's like you wake up one day and do you even really love what you do anymore because you don't get to do the parts that you do. And so to answer your question directly after that context is they lack the maybe willingness or commitment to hiring for the pieces that are not their strengths, right? I heard this quote on a book that I was reading on the plane here where it was specifically talking about hiring, and the difference was most people fall into that trap of hiring for lack of weaknesses rather than hiring for the strengths that you need for the objective that you're trying to accomplish. And I thought, man, I made that mistake so many times, right?
Yeah,
like,
me too.
And the industry, I remember maybe like my 3rd MSP that I was at, probably about 10 years into my career, was in the conference room just literally banging my head at why did this situation happen? Like, how could we even find ourselves in this situation, right? And me and the CEO had this conversation of sometimes when you're in an MSP, it feels like the recipe for success is to suck a little bit less than the next guy and stay in business a little bit longer. and like, if you just accomplish those 2 things, then you will find success. But there's a different recipe, and you can find success in a lot faster and easier ways than simply outlasting the other people.
That one, I love it because I think that's exactly what's going on, but nobody says it.
No one
and
says
I don't think
it.
you realize it. I think it's like, there are some people that love the infinite game, right? And the game is to stay in business, and I understand that. But I think there are people that are just playing that, but at a lower level, just saying, I'm just trying to stay in business.
Right.
And if I stay in business, that's, victory, even if I'm not growing, if I'm not learning, and if I'm not changing. It's just a victory to stay in business. And especially, it can be really challenging at certain levels, as you know, because it can happen at any level, but I think it's easier at the smaller levels to be in a price war.
Right.
You're not charging enough, and all of a sudden you have a bunch of competition coming in, and they're kind of just throwing out lower numbers. You feel pressure to lower yours. All of a sudden
you hit on that earlier, which I do think is also fundamentally true of my experience with almost all MSPs that I've interacted with, is they all also tend to come from more of a altruistic background. And maybe that's a little too strong of a word, but like they will give you the shit off their back. They like to help. And as a result, a business owner used to say, like, he was the kind of person who would always put money in the plate at church but would never talk about it, right? Like that's how I equate the MSP concept too, where like you're always willing to give, and in a self-sacrificial way, that you've put yourself last for so long that you don't even know how to structure a sales conversation that puts you in a pricing that is going to leave some money left on the vine, that you actually have something drop to the bottom line at the end of it all, right? And the sad part is you compound that over years, and these amazing people with amazing businesses who have had so much impact have nothing left for themselves or their family at the end of it all. And yet you do have control as an MSP owner to fix that along the way and to start getting the results that you want and to transition from a lifestyle or a business that's supporting a type of lifestyle that you want into a true business, from that lifestyle business. But it's also, it requires some vulnerability, and it requires some action and execution and risk taking. And we were talking before we started rolling, like, it requires the desire and the ability to be okay and at peace with sucking for a little while.
Yeah.
And like understanding that that is the barrier to entry. That's actually the moat around your business, because others aren't willing to do it either. So if you can commit to 3 months of sucking and like not being Mr. or Mrs. Fix-It who has all the answers, who's here to solve a problem, and like just commit to the process of learning and understanding and like shedding your own expectation, just showing up and having conversations with people, human to human, even though it's uncomfortable and awkward when you're not used to it. The other side of that is a business you never could have dreamt for yourself.
So how do I know, I can relate as an MSP, the tech guy, like, even if it's, let's say, I remember very clearly when I was like, sales is clearly the issue and I'm clearly that issue.
Right.
And I have no idea what I'm doing and how I'm closing deals, how I'm managing, how I'm asking for business, all sorts of things. And I remember, going to seek help. But I also very clearly remember going, I'm going to read a book. Yeah. I'm going to go to this event in a weekend, and I'm going to get this thing.
Yeah.
And, it's entirely different to say, I'm going to suck for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months.
Day in, day out, right?
Yeah. It's, at least for me, it's really hard to do that. So how do I get out of my comfort zone, this safe land over here? And I feel like it's easy for me to say, I'll go spend a whole weekend at an event, reading books, and then I'm going to come out. Yeah. And maybe I won't be the expert, but I'm going to be decent. I'm going to be, I'm going to be proficient. Yeah. And all of a sudden, I'm just really bad. Yeah. And I remember that was my sales journey. Really bad for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. I was the same way, because I came up through MSP on the technical side of the business. I did that for the first 11 years, kind of every role on the tech side. And then I ended up in this strange thing called like account management that then sort of became VCIO before VCIO hit the market, 10-ish years ago. And then I was just the person that was like the sales engineer that all the sales reps brought to all the meetings. And I enjoyed that part because it was helping and solving problems, but in a different way. Yeah. And then I remember being on the wrong side of the commission coin for doing all that. And so that was when I transitioned to sales full time, and also got humbled insanely quickly, because there was so much more to it behind the curtain and off stage that you never saw. Yeah. And there was no one but me to figure it out at that point, right? I was the sales executive now. I wasn't the VCIO. And so like you had to really crack that code. Right. The thing that I witnessed over those 18 years at 5 different MSPs was that like impulsive behavior that the CEO levels would generally have, right? They'd go to the thing for the weekend and they'd think they got it, or they read the right book on the plane on the way back, and then they'd drop the grenade on the company. Yeah. Like, here's the flash in the pan, but their attention span's so short that they're already off looking for the next thing. Yeah. And like lobbing the grenades over their heads, right? At the business every 3, 6, 9 months. And no one knows what to do with that. And I think the first thing you can do is, there's kind of 2 schools, but there's more, but let's just talk macro. You're either the tech guy that started the tech business and you've grown it, or you're the business focused, sales oriented individual who built the business and built it with tech people around you to like deliver. Figure out which one of those you are first. You have 2 options: commit to sucking, but make sure that you backfill all the other functions of you in the company so that it doesn't collapse while you're figuring out how to sell for the next year. Or but hire to that strength. Yeah.
Commit to sucking. That's easier said than done.
Yeah, very much so.
And then if I go on a new journey, that second part, backfill. Yeah. Because somehow I think I'm Superman. Right. And I'm going to go and learn an entirely new discipline that entire teams of people
Right.
normally do, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be the SDR, the AE, the account management. I'm going to be all these different roles, but I'm also going to wear the CEO hat and the accounting hat and the little L3 hat. So, how do you manage, or what would you say to me if you're saying, Damien, you need to go get uncomfortable and get this new role?
Yeah.
Because number one, my first thing is, okay, well, once I go into this new thing, like I might want to run back into the old thing. So I'm not sure if I want to hand that off.
Yeah, you will. You'll self-sabotage most of the time based on what I've seen. And the first, I think the foundation to the answer is one of the things that most MSPs unknowingly do. That's a component of the self-sabotage, is that because of the nature of how we grew as businesses, you do have an army of like jacks of all trades or shared hats, shared responsibilities, and we don't even realize that we set ourselves up as individuals and as an organization to fail, or at least struggle, when we have all that shared responsibility. It's really similar to the everyone's accountable so no one's accountable problem, right? And the big cop-out is that there's always a valid excuse to have missed the mark, to not hitting the goal, to do whatever. So usually when I get that question from an MSP owner who is taking on the sales hat, is like, what's your number? What's your number this quarter? What's your number this year? What's your number? Yeah. And then if I get cross-eyed responses, then it's like, okay, let me ask it differently. As a sales rep, like, what is the growth goal? What's the number that has to be hit in order to keep your job? Well, both of those things really attack the lack of accountability as well, right? Which gets uncomfortable. Yeah. But if you as a business owner who's responsible for sales and growth don't give yourself a number, and you don't hit it, and you're not willing to fire yourself as the sales rep, then you're just going to compound the problem and prolong it even further. And so a couple of things. One, I think, is the best possible thing you can do for your business is create clear, defined roles with singularity as the focus. So a sales rep that's responsible for sales activities and sales outcomes and sales deliverables. And it needs to be a sales professional. Because the other thing that MSPs unknowingly, I think, get wrong is that traditionally speaking, the idea that they have about what sales is everything they've done to get the business to where they are, which in my definition is order taking. Yeah. Right? Their sales conversations look and feel a little something like, how many people do you have? How many locations do you have? How many devices do you have? Are you going to be growing? Here's the quote. I'll follow up once or twice, but then I'm off to the other thing that I've forgotten about. And like, that's the sales motion, but it's worked. So it's programmed you to think that that's what success looks like and that's what sales looks like, but it's not. That's just order taking from warm referrals or introductions, right? Yeah. Actual growth comes from relationships that you didn't have, and there's no third, fourth, or fifth degree of Kevin Bacon to help you get the deal. It's literally a sales conversation, right? I need to educate or compel or persuade or facilitate someone buying the thing they already desire that I happen to have. And that's a totally different skill set, and it's okay to not have it. Yeah. And it's also okay to recognize that you're just going to suck at trying it for a while you figure out how to do it. Yes. But it really comes down to clarity and accountability, and then consistency, right? Consistent action over time more than anything. And figure out, like, do I have this? Is this my strength, or am I covering up for a weakness? Am I just filling a need that the business has, or am I really doubling down on where I can have true impact? And that's one of the flaws that I see across all of it. It's like, self-sabotage might be one way of looking at it, but it's like, well, I've tried outsourcing XYZ, or I've done this or that. Like, and we're so black and white to write off the things that have not worked out well, rather than looking at the uncomfortable truth where it's like, okay, well, I signed up for a service that gave me 10 leads a month, but I still don't know how to close a lead or nurture it from start to finish. That's so right. Was it the leads that were wrong and they're the failure? Usually that's how we like to project it, because it preserves our ego. Yeah. But the reality might be, I don't even know how to pick up the phone and have that conversation for the lead that was sent to me. And so it's just easier to say, well, marketing doesn't work or cold lead gen doesn't work. And then you can get consumed by, I've got this tier 3 project I need to get done, or the server migration, or a net new client, or this onboarding, or I got to pick a new insurance vendor, right? Like all the stuff that the multiple hats gives you. So I think there's just safety in that for MSPs. And then there's no one to call your bluff.
Right.
At the end of the day, you get what you tolerate. And if you tolerate that from yourself, no one's going to call you on that. So then you're only just going to get what you've gotten.
Especially if you're the owner, right?
Yeah, right.
You get what you tolerate. Amazing one. You talked about the singularity of roles.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, when I start growing, one of my mistakes I made, and what I see MSPs do, is, okay, maybe I'm not great at sales.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to hire a sales rep.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, I talk to so many MSPs that hand them a phone book.
Yeah.
And they hire maybe somebody that's an account executive.
Right.
And they say, go to business after hours.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a phone book.
Yeah.
Just make it rain.
Yeah.
Right? And that's not specializing. That is throwing everything out. So how, when you are smaller and you're just getting into sales, getting that first person and you're getting it built out, especially, it's one thing if they're following you and you built that process and you've gone through the pain and you're handing the process off to somebody. But if I'm not that, if I am really hiring because I have this deficit of skills,
right.
How do I even attack this problem? Because I don't feel like I can just hire an army of people, and I can't hire a CRO and say, go fix that for me.
Right.
So how do I get started? And then I'm wrestling with the singularity. It's like, I don't know. I feel like I need an army of people.
Right. I think the one core takeaway I had through my journey on that was, again, as MSPs, and I can speak that way because I was one for so long, like I fell into this category too. We believe that the problem is solved when we've made the decision rather than when we've built the plan through the decision that we made. Meaning we think we solved the sales problem when we hire our first sales rep because we need it done, right? Well, what does the first day of the job look like for the sales rep? Again, what's their number? What's their quota? Who are they selling to? What are they selling? More importantly, what aren't they selling? Who aren't they talking to? What
aren't they selling is a big one.
What aren't we going to do, right? What does their 90-day growth and success plan look like? Right. In most cases, to your point, the definition of success and the problem being solved was like, I hired my sales rep and they start on the first, and here's the phone book. It's not all of the context beneath, here's what success looks like for sales. And so I think first, if nothing else, understand that the problem is not solved when you make the decision, but the problem is solved when you've built the foundation beneath the decision that you made, at least 90 days out in front of the decision that was made. And then more importantly too, we sort of like abdicate responsibility for what the result is as well, right? So we hire the rep and now we just expect the magical lead fairy and the magical MRR fairy to just drop clients onto our P&L.
Right.
And then when it doesn't happen, we get upset because we're paying you all this money, we're doing all these things, and it's not a reflection of, what could have been done, what should have been done, but instead, like, you didn't set them up for success. I was fortunate really early on in my journey, one, to be offered opportunities within the MSPs I worked for that, in my own opinion and my own self-assessment after the fact, I didn't deserve. I wasn't prepared for. I didn't have the experience for it. But I also knew once I committed to it that I wouldn't fail and there was no other option. Like everything was kind of a burn the boats scenario. And if I follow that ladder up a bit, I was also really fortunate to discover on my own, through my own evolution and increase in roles and everything else, like what the heck a Peter principle was, right? And I was 24, maybe, 23, 24. I was elevated to network operations manager, responsible for 26 people across 2 cities with zero
for more people than you are years old.
Exactly. With zero management experience, zero training, zero anything else. It was just, I found a way to be great in the roles that I had before that. So the natural progression for an MSP is to elevate that way, right? You take your best engineer and all of a sudden they're tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. They're at tier 3 forever. You turn them into your network operations manager, your service manager, whatever you call them. And now all of a sudden everything sucks and they're miserable and nothing else is really working because fundamentally the skill set that it takes to be successful in those roles is drastically different. I was self-aware enough to realize I was miserable doing it, but I wasn't setting everyone else up for success as a result of that being my responsibility. At that MSP, one of our core values, though, was to put yourself and everyone else in a position to win. And I knew that I wasn't in a position to win, but I also wasn't putting the 26 people that I was responsible for in a position to be successful either. And so having the foresight and the trust and the relationship built with the CEO there to say, look, this is not for me. I mean, even if you think I'm doing a great job, like this, it just isn't for me, right? Let's figure out where I can go back and provide value and like really work my magic. And I think what I discovered through that process and the grace of being able to pivot like that was, one, I didn't even know what the Peter Principle was either until I encountered it myself. And two, I think that's kind of where people get stuck, is the illusion of what success looks like is, again, not trained, not taught, not prescribed in here's your growth plan, here's this role to this role to this role. I mean, my career wasn't that way. I think I've had about every title you can have except for CEO at an MSP, but it wasn't because that was my career progression path that was pre-set out. It was just sort of showing up every day for the job that I wanted versus the job that I had, and then realizing which ones were great and which ones were not playing to my strengths, and trying to double down to the pieces that really felt fulfilling. It was the gold.
Several times in this interview, I feel like you're reading my story, like one of my guys, L1, L2, L3, and ultimately I put him in the leadership role.
Yeah.
Worst decision ever,
right,
for him, for me, for the team. The blessing is he came to me and kind of was self-aware enough to help realize that and work through a transition, because I think I was pushing him to be something he couldn't really be, didn't want to be, loathed doing, literally loathed doing it. He was like, I went from the best place to work that I love coming in to like, why am I doing this?
Miserable.
Why do I exist? Why am I even here?
Yeah.
And it wasn't that what we were doing or the mission. It was that I just had the right guy in the wrong role.
Right.
And man, I'm very fortunate that he had the emotional maturity, and that we could work through it, because I think the normal thing, me being the idiot that I was, would have been like, man, I just took my best guy and put him in the wrong role, and now he's gone.
And I've seen that, one, I experienced it multiple times at different MSPs, but then I observed it as well, right? Now, again, I was very fortunate in my journey to at least be at a level of influence if I wasn't directly on the leadership team for most of that 18 years. And so I was able to see the patterns from my own past as well and prevent some of those scenarios, because the thing about MSP across the board, whether it's sales and trying to sell for an MSP or it's operations and running an MSP, is that we are like masters of ambiguity, right? Like no one gave me the playbook to figure out how to do what I did the whole time.
That's right.
I just was scrappy enough with enough determination or grit or, some other words probably, to not find success. And not everyone is cut out for that.
Yeah.
Not everyone shows up wanting that. A lot of people, and this isn't a bad thing, but a lot of people desire the clarity of what progression looks like, right? This is the role that you have. These are the expectations. This is what winning the day looks like. If you win enough days in a row, then this is what's next looks like. And this is what winning the day in that role looks like. And then to your own point, like there's not enough grace, I don't think, to realize maybe when we've made a Peter Principle decision and own that I have the right person in the wrong seat. So I either need to create another seat, find the right seat, or just be okay absorbing, that loss until we figure it out, keeping the right person on, but putting them in a position to win again. And I think all of that can be found in the space that you create as the business owner to really take a step back and look at the on the business, not in the business stuff, right? Most owners, leaders at MSPs are so, back to singularity of roles and focus, they're so in the business because they haven't found ways to replace or displace the areas that they have to contribute, or their ego won't let them step aside, one or the other, that you get trapped in that same thing. It's just still, again, a singularity of focus. And then because you're sucked in it, then you get trapped back into well, I have plenty of viable excuses, right? To lack the accountability. Like, well, what do you want me to do? Create this new role, hire this new person when I have these 9 projects that need done in 17 days before the end of the year? Like, they find themselves in these irrefutable arguments, which is really just making excuses.
Yes, making excuses. I love how you wrap that up. So we're at GrowCon. We're talking about growth.
Yeah.
If I'm sitting there as the CEO, how do I understand if I need to get out of my comfort zone and lead the sales charge, and develop the sales skills, and not be an order taker, all the things, that big journey? How do I know if I need to take that journey, or if I need to hire for that journey because it's a chasm too wide, or something I'm going to loathe? Like, how could I figure that out before falling, prey to the Peter principle myself?
Sure. I think based on our last conversation, the data would tell me that what MSPs are leaning into to try to answer the most, which sits beneath your question, which is part of my answer, which didn't go deep enough, was measuring your level of commitment to the vision that you have. And we talked a little bit about that, right? Time, talent, treasure. Let me back up and start answering your conversation by saying, we're at the end of the year. It's December. What were your goals for 2024? You're staring down the barrel of 2025. Did you hit it or miss it? What was your number?
Yeah.
Do you get to keep your job in 2025, or are you firing yourself as the sales development rep?
Right.
Figure that out first. If there was no number, that's step 1, right? Declare a number, period. Write it down. Make it public, even if that just means internal accountability inside your organization. But now it exists, right? So you're either making 2025 about, I'm going to go hit that number and I'm going to do everything I can myself to do it, making those decisions and prioritizing it, committing to the resources and the time and the talent and the treasure to making it happen, or acknowledging that there's a faster way, which is to tap into people who've already solved the problem that you're trying to solve. Bring that person in, bring the process in, bring the guidance or the expertise in, and then focus all your time on executing the plan rather than trying to solve the problem someone else has already solved. Because as natural problem solvers, that's the sexy dopamine hit part of the business for us, is to solve the problem.
That's right.
It's an illusion, right? Someone else has solved it. We're not all that special. We're not the smartest in the world. Other people have the answers.
Right.
Investing in their solution and committing to the execution of their plan, make it your own if you want, but at the same time, that's just another version of self-sabotage where you're like, I want the success, that person has it, I've paid for them to give it to me, but I want it to be mine, so here's my DNA, and I've completely butchered the process. Like, everything's Frankenstein, it seems like, inside an MSP, because we can't let that part go.
Right.
But it is oftentimes the commitment to the decision is where I see people fail. Like, I want to grow by $100,000 MRR next year. Great. And maybe that number's too big. Let's just go 10 because it's more manageable. Okay, $10,000 net new MRR next year. Like, how are you going to get there? Deduce it. Like, work backwards, reverse engineer it. You're good at that stuff. You're logical and analytical. That part's easy. But how are you going to get there, period, right? And by when? If it doesn't have a date, then it's not really a goal. And then once you know, then you have to commit those resources. Maybe it's time. Maybe it's your own talent. Maybe it's someone else's. Maybe it's just dollars in an agency. Maybe you're bringing it in-house. I mean, there's plenty of ways to solve the problem, but the problem needs to be clear. And then the commitment to solving the problem. Like, what happens if you miss?
Yes.
Right? What happens if you miss? And what happens if you hit?
Yeah.
Right? Make a president's club. Pre-declare, like pre-buy the tickets to wherever you're going to go as the reward for getting it done. But what happens if you miss, right? And who's going to hold you accountable to that? And what's it going to cost to do it? I think people tend to not drastically undervalue or under quantify what it will take, but they lack the discipline to stick with it long enough to get the result that was, I think of that 3 feet from gold analogy, right? People quit when it was just like one more swing of the pickaxe and it was right there. And instead we say, doesn't work, or it doesn't work for me. Or, you know, burn it all down kind of a mentality instead, which is really just do it longer than the other guy and stay in business longer and suck a little bit less, right? Do what you say you're going to do. But more importantly, I think it's make the commitment to the number. What happens if you don't get it? And then how are you going to make that happen?
Right, especially when you're the owner.
Yeah.
Because everybody else, you want them to have a number. And they're going to have a consequence.
Yeah.
Right. And then as the owner, you often don't want to commit to a number.
Right.
You don't even write it down. You don't even say you don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
Then you don't, like you said, you don't commit.
Right.
And then whether you hit it or you don't. And I almost wonder if it's not only the not, but especially when you do.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
there's a lot of power to that carrot, not just the stick.
Yeah. There's a piece to that I don't think those that haven't sat inside a sales role, and certainly those that have sat inside a sales role that don't get the veto card of being an owner, they don't know the emotional impact or the psychological impact or the weight that is truly placed on a quota carrying role, right?
Yeah.
And even an MSP owner who commits to, I'm only going to do 10 grand net new MRR, which someone would be happy with next year, they don't even know the weight of carrying the quota, because in their mind, they know that what's going to happen if I don't, right? Like, who's going to fire me?
Right.
It doesn't matter. I'll just set it at 10 again the next year, or I'll set it at 20 and we'll hit 8 and I'll be happy. Like, there's just this, I think of it as like the chicken exit on a roller coaster, right? You didn't even have to get on the ride because you just waited in line all day to just step right through the cart and out the chicken exit. That's what it's like to not hold yourself accountable to that number. And that's sort of like maybe a more quantifiable way of defining the what's it going to take to suck for a couple of months or a couple of years. There's no expectation of time, by the way. People do it differently, right? You evolve, you learn, you grow, different resources, different backgrounds, different aptitudes, all that stuff. But the self-sabotage of knowing that there isn't an implication for if you do not hit the number is, I think, sort of the secret unlock that hopefully you, Mr. MSP owner, Mrs. MSP owner, that you're hearing that is like, oh yeah, you're right. I hate you for saying that, Jeffrey, but like, you're right, you know?
Yeah.
Because accountability makes you feel icky. And if you feel icky, then like, you know, you're doing it right.
Yeah.
You know, so find a way to put yourself in a position to not feel like you let yourself down. Because if you set out with the goal of knowing that no one can do anything to you about it at the end of the year when you don't hit your number, then it's so toxic all year long for you, and you don't even know it, because you've given yourself that out an excuse, and you just lied to yourself the whole time. And more importantly, you lied to the business and all the people that are there to trust you and do it. And so it's just this wild, complex, you know, macro psychological ecosystem.
Yes.
But ask any quota carrying rep, and they've all gone through it until they're fully comfortable with whatever the quota is, because it isn't about the quota.
That's right.
It's about winning.
That's right.
Right? And finding a way to win.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if you can figure out how to do that every day and define what that is, you're ahead of almost everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Talking about accountability, I remember when I was like, I don't have to like making calls, but I have to make calls.
Yeah.
And so as an owner, man, I hate doing the books, but all of a sudden I was doing the books. I was doing anything to avoid making calls, cold calls.
Yeah.
And so I had to get a peer of mine, and we built this accountability. And every week we had a quick check-in.
Yep.
Did you or didn't you? And then to make it real, there was two things. One, I'm embarrassed to say, but I will. The first was, you know, I'm going to give you $100 every time I don't do this every week.
Yeah.
And when I was just getting going, that was the difference between eating ramen noodles and not eating it's painful. And then the next one was, I'm going to show up at this event wearing something that you get to pick. Yeah. You know, and then what's funny is psychologically that was the motivator. I was like, I know your taste, and I don't think I'm going to like that.
Yeah.
And
no,
so
that's
I was like,
such a
I'm
good
going to pick up the phone.
I'm glad you brought it up, because it helped me clarify some answers to that too, because this was a litmus test that I would have when I talk one-on-one with some MSPs. It's like, I can tell whether or not you're going to lie to yourself all year or not based upon a list of your to-dos right now. Because whether you realize it or not, when you created your list, all those sales activities that are like number 39 and 40 and 41 at the very bottom of the list that have been there for months or years, I already know that we need to replace you as the sales rep, right?
Yep.
Because you don't find it fulfilling, you find it draining. You're avoiding it consciously, and as a result, you'll never get the results that are on the other end of those activities. And so, like, just be honest with yourself, and it's okay if you always prioritize everything else over anything sales related. Just acknowledge that that isn't what lights you up inside, and find someone who is lit up by it. And when you put people in a position to really work their magic day in and day out, the results are magical. And it isn't like they don't feel the same way you do about it.
That's right.
They feel like it's the greatest server migration they ever deployed, right? Or the biggest onboarding they ever accomplished, or a fully remote exchange migration. It's like whatever the things are that you're like, man, I nailed it. That's how they feel when they pick up the phone and call.
Yeah.
When they close the deal, when they pull the signature in, when they do all the things that go into it. And I can clearly remember about mid-journey when I was realizing I was not a network operations manager, that same thing. The thing that tripped me to realize that this is not for me is I slowly realized that everyone else in the world does not look at or experience the world the same way that I do.
Right.
And more importantly, I actually didn't know how to communicate what I needed or what I intended to have happen to someone who doesn't see the world the same way as me. Because there was a language barrier and a mental barrier, not a they're an issue thing. It was like I lacked the ability to draw the parallels through communication at that age and experience to get the desired impact I needed from 26 people, because they weren't 23 or 26 Jeffreys like looking at it all the same way. And I couldn't figure out, like, help me understand how you made the decisions you made to get to where we are having this conversation. I wasn't mature enough or experienced enough to know how to navigate any of that at the time. But it was a great, powerful lesson of actually people and understanding kind of that point that I'd illustrated. So yeah, it's, I think, was it Brian Tracy maybe, is sort of like a show me your activities and I can show you your future concept. And it's like, okay, show me what you've been avoiding for the last 2 weeks and I'll tell you what decisions you need to make, in which roles you need to change, or which hats you need to take off. And it doesn't mean you failed. It just means you actually want the outcome. So let's give it to someone who wants it too.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of power to show me your calendar and I'll show you where you'll be in a year type of thing, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a big difference to saying it and then it being in your calendar.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Making sure it happens. I feel like we could do this the entire conference, but I know you've got other things to do. Thank you for making the time to be on MSP Mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. Loved it. Appreciate it.